The Gree Tree, From the Color of My Words by Lynn Joseph, illustrated by Marla Bagetta. No one had to point out that I was different from everyone else in our village. It was clear from the first day that I began climbing the Gree Tree and staying up there for hours. "What's wrong with your daughter?" neighbors asked Mommy. "She's not right in her head," they answered themselves, when Mommy only shrugged her shoulders. Poppy would say, "Nothing's wrong with sitting in a tree. It's the same as sitting on a porch, except higher." Roberto would climb up with me sometimes, but he got bored quickly and swung down, yelling like a monkey. Angela shook her head at me and said I would never be a real chica, because chicas do not climb trees when they are 12 years old. Not even Guario understood, although he tried. He asked me once what I did up there. That was more than anyone else had ventured to inquire. I told him I looked around. He asked me if I didn't think I was wasting a lot of time when I could be doing something else to prepare for my future, such as studying English. Guario always had in his mind the future. Sometimes I think he was tormented by all of us who didn't particularly care what tomorrow was going to bring. And really, what was there to know? Either it would rain or it would not. But it was definitely going to be hot, and Mommy was going to cook, and Poppy was going to sit on the porch, and the radio was going to play merengues all day long. That was for sure. Besides, I already knew what I wanted to do in my future. I wanted to be a writer, but only Mommy knew that. If I told Guario, he would say I was unreasonable. If I told anyone else, they would laugh. But in my Gree Tree, I could be anything I wanted to be, even a writer with words for everything that I saw from my leafy green hideout. I could see the ocean, glittering silver in the sunlight. I could see people trudging along the dusty road from Sosa, some balancing buckets of water on their heads. I could see boys playing baseball in the schoolyard with a tree branch, a bat, and a rubber ball. I could see the river meandering over rocks, hungry for rain. Far off in Puerto Plata, I could see Mount Isabel de Torres, a green giant with misty white curls dancing round her head. I could see the sleepy lagoon and the sad little homes of the lagoon people. I could see the birds that flew past my Gree Tree, their ruby and gold velvet feathers shimmering on their tiny bodies. I could see the rainbows that glowed in the sea sky after the rain passed. I counted the sunset roses in Senora Garcia's backyard. I could see my teacher climbing the hill near her house, and I could see Poppy sitting on the porch nodding off to sleep. Then one day I saw something that I had never seen before, and I was so scared that I almost fell out of the tree. There I was looking at the sea when suddenly out of it rose a giant monster, tall and black and covered with its shadow. Before I could scream, the monster fell back into the sea. I scrambled down from the tree quickly and ran towards my house, shouting, "Poppy, there's a monster in the sea!" Poppy woke from his siesta. "¿Qué pasa?" "A monster," I repeated. "A giant sea monster, and it's coming this way." I shouted inside the house, "Mommy, come quick! There's a monster in the sea. I saw it." Mommy came outside and Angela followed her. They were drying their hands from washing the lunch dishes. Everyone looked at me as if I were crazy. "It's true," I said, jumping up and down. Mommy made me sit down and describe exactly what I saw. Before I had finished, Angela shouted my news to her best friend walking by. Then Poppy waved over some of his domino-playing amigos and told them what I saw from the top of my Gree Tree. Soon our porch was surrounded with people, all asking me to tell my story again. When I had told it for the 4th time, Senora Garcia, the Calmada owner, began to laugh. "You must have fallen asleep in the tree and had a bad dream, Carino," he said. "No," I replied, shaking my head. "I saw it." But his words had relieved everyone's fears of a sea monster. "Yes," they agreed, "you must have imagined it." "No, you idiots," I wanted to shout. I didn't imagine anything, but I kept quiet because Mommy and Poppy would not like it if I shouted at the neighbors and called them idiots. That was for sure. As everyone sat on the porch to share a drink and talk about my sea monster, I slipped away and ran to my gree tree. I heard Mommy calling me, but I pretended I didn't hear and climbed up the tree fast. I needed to find out what I had seen, if it would come back again. I sat down on my usual branch and tucked a few leaves away from my eyes. Then I stared at the sea. I looked so hard and for so long that its blueness filled up my eyeballs and I had to blink a lot so I wouldn't go blind. The afternoon faded into evening and the sea's blueness turned to gray. I watched and waited. My stomach made grumbling noises, but I covered them with my hand. Then, just as I began to think that maybe I had imagined it after all, I saw a splash of white water. The splash rose up and up until it was high in the air like a magic fountain. "It's a volcano," I whispered. I remembered that my teacher had told us about how many of the Caribbean islands had been formed by volcanoes that rose out of the sea. I gasped. Maybe I was seeing the beginning of a brand new island right next to the Dominican Republic. As I kept on looking, a black shape emerged out of the fountain of water. It rose and turned as if doing a dance, and that's when I saw the gleaming white throat of the sea monster. It hovered in between heaven and the ocean for a few seconds and then fell back into the sea, with water splashing and spraying salt droplets as high as the pearl pink clouds. There's the sea monster. My heart beat furiously as I steadied myself so I wouldn't fall down from the tree. I was right. I had not imagined anything. There was really a sea monster out there, but this time I didn't rush down to tell everyone. What would the people do, I wondered? Would they try to find it, or maybe kill it? Somehow, although I didn't know why, I could tell the sea monster was just not dangerous. It just wanted to swim and splash and jump out of the sea the same way I jump over the waves. I climbed down the tree and went home. The first thing I wanted to do was eat, but people were all over the porch asking wildly, "We saw it, Anna Rosa," they shouted. "We saw that big sea monster of yours." Mommy was passing around a plate of dulces, sweet milk candy that I love. She must have made them just for me because they were still warm and soft. Children were carrying huge plates filled with different foods that their mothers had made. Angela was directing them to put the food here or there on our big table. I saw plates piled high with arroz con pollo, platanos fritos, and batatas fritas. Senor Garcia apologized over and over to me. About 100 people were gathered on our porch, in the yard and alongside the road, talking about the sea monster. "The tourist high season is coming," said Senor Rojas, who owned a jeep that he rented to tourists. "We can't let anyone know we have a sea monster hanging around in Susa Bay." "But why not?" asked Senora Perez, who sold paintings on the beach. "It could be a tourist attraction. Plenty of people may decide to come here just to see it." Half the folks whispered, "He's right," and the other half said, "She's the one who's right." It looked as if we were going to have a big debate on our porch, just like the ones that take place when it's a presidential election year. The way everyone was carrying on, soon we would be having people writing merengues about the sea monster, and there would be a sea monster fiestas all over the place, just like during elections. I shook my head and just listened to everyone as they ate a plate heaping high with food. That poor sea monster, I thought. Then the people began to make a plan. When Dominicans get together and decide to make a plan, watch out, because there are plans and then there are plans with a capital P, and this was definitely a plan with a capital P. The first thing the people decided was that someone had to keep watch over the sea monster. Well, everyone looked around to see who would volunteer. That's when we knew the plan would not work, because no one wanted to do something so stupid as to go down to the sea and watch for the sea monster. It was Angela who got the bright idea that since I saw it first, I could keep watch over it from my gree tree. Everyone turned to me and nodded their heads. Finally, a good reason for her to be up there all the time, I heard Senor Garcia whisper. Poppy was looking at me and nodding his head, proud that his daughter was selected for such an important job. I said, okay, I would do it. Then the plan continued. Half of the people wanted to make signs and announce that Susa Bay had a new visitor, and it was a one-of-a-kind sea monster. The other half of the crowd shook their heads and said, no, it was too obvious. We must be subtle about delicate matters like this, Senora Perez said. We must make up a wonderful story about the sea monster, give it a name, make it a friendly monster, and then tell the world. Otherwise, all we will do is scare everyone away from this side of the island. She had a point. A story about the sea monster was much better than a billboard with an arrow pointing this way to Sea Monster of Susa Bay. The idea of it all made me giggle. Wait until Guario came home and heard all this. I could hardly wait for him to return from the restaurant. Well, said Senora Rojas, what will we name the sea monster? And who knows how to write a good story about it anyway, asked Senora Garcia. Senora Perez shrugged her shoulders. I don't know how to write so good, but I think we could make something up. Then Mommy, who was usually quiet during these kinds of discussions, spoke up loud and clear. Ana Rosa would be the best person to write a story about the sea monster. I was shocked. This wasn't the same Mommy who worshipped silence. People began shaking their heads. A child to do something so important? They whispered. Yes, said Mommy. Let us give her a notebook to write in, and she will write a story for us about the sea monster. If we don't like it, someone else can try. The way Mommy said it, so definite and firm, made people nod their heads in agreement. Well, it doesn't hurt to let her try, they said. So Senor Garcia went and brought back a notebook from his colmado. Mommy gave it to me, and her hands were cold like the river. While grown-ups stayed up late on the porch, talking and drinking and eating, I went inside and began to write a story about the sea monster. First, I tried to give him a name, but I couldn't think of a good one, so instead I thought about what he looked like. Then I imagined what he must feel like living all alone in the sea, different from all the other sea creatures. The fish and the animals in the ocean were probably afraid of his huge size and his big nose and long swishing tail, and they probably didn't want to play with him. Maybe they just whispered about how strange he looked. But the sea monster wanted a friend. Deep down, I understood exactly how the sea monster must feel. I began to write. I wrote page after page in the notebook the people had given me. When I was finished, it was almost midnight. I went to the porch. Everyone was still there, laughing and talking, and some were dancing to the music on the radio. Children were asleep on their mothers' and fathers' laps. Some of the bigger children were sprawled out on a blanket on the floor, and the merengue music played in the background lullaby for them. When the people saw me, they got quiet. Someone turned off the radio. Some woke the children up on their laps. Papi moved from his chair and put his arms around my shoulders. He led me to the front of the porch. Then everyone watched me and waited. I stood there trembling, holding that notebook with my story close to my heart. I knew right then that this was it. The whole world would find out about me. I stopped thinking. I started just to read. I did not look at anyone, not Papi or Mommy or Angela. I read and I read, and I turned to the last page of the story. There, the other sea creatures invited the lonely sea monster to a big underwater fiesta, even though there is no one else like him around, and even though he is so big that he knocks over many of them with his big nose and tail. And the sea monster is so happy that he leaps out of the ocean, sending sparkling waves all around him like a giant ring of light. I looked up then and saw many things at once. I saw Papi sitting on the edge of his chair, strange and silent. I saw Mommy with her hands folded and her head bowed, as if praying. I saw the neighbors smiling and nodding their heads. Then I saw Guario, who must have walked up to the edge of the porch while I was reading. It was Guario's face that I focused on. He was smiling. My big, strong brother who worried about our future, my serious Guario who almost never smiled, suddenly let out a whoop and grabbed me up. He spun me around and around. "Little sister, I am buying you a new notebook every month, no matter what," he shouted. I closed my eyes so I wouldn't start crying there in front of all the neighbors. Guario always kept his promises. I would be able to write down everything now, everything I thought or dreamed or felt or saw or wondered about. I was so happy I thought I would leap as high as the sea monster. Then in the background I heard clapping. The people stood up in front of their chairs and were clapping for me. I heard shouts of how great my story was and people congratulating Mommy and kissing Poppy on the cheek, telling them how lucky it was that I was so smart. I heard Mommy saying it had nothing to do with luck. I grinned and went over to her, and she put her arms around me and squeezed my shoulders. "You're going to write many stories, remember, Kara?" she whispered in my ear. It was the happiest night of my life. Well, we all forgot about the sea monster until the next day. Over the radio, a news broadcast announced that someone had spotted a humpback whale making its way to Samana Bay for the annual winter mating season that had gotten sidetracked into Susa. "In Samana Bay, it is only a 2-hour drive from here," said Poppy. "Well, the poor whale doesn't know how to drive," Mama teased. For 2 weeks, our humpback whale jumped and frolicked about in Susa Bay until finally it headed east to Samana to join the other 3,000 humpback whales that go there every winter. But while he was in Susa, I watched every day from my gree tree, the beautiful black and white sea monster that helped me to make my green dreams come true. I loved the whale, and I named him Guario. The end.